If you were watching a couple of weeks ago, you might have heard us talk about the open gaming license. Even if you're not a gamer, that was relevant at the time, and now it is relevant to everybody. And now the reason it's relevant is abundantly clear. It was relevant at the time because it was such a good example of how corporations talk when they're lying, when they have something they know that you will not want them to do, that they're going to try to get away with doing anyway. Unfortunately for Wizards of the Coast, the makers of Dungeons & Dragons, who relied on something called an open gaming license, or rather who offered something called an open gaming license for 20 years, their fans, the people who buy their products, are notorious for getting into the weeds and reading closely the rules. So when Wizards announced that they were ending their open gaming license, which had allowed independent content producers to use Dungeons & Dragons without worrying, like on their streams, on their shows, whatever, without worrying about paying them for it, when they tried to undo that, there was an uproar. The reason being, a lot of people are only into Dungeons & Dragons because first they saw some charming little show somewhere that helped popularize it. Well, the backlash was huge. The makers of another game, tabletop game called Pathfinder, said they were starting their own version of an open gaming license. They called it the ORC, O-R-C. D&D Beyond, which is Dungeons & Dragons' subscription-based service, they lost tons and tons of subscribers, and therefore tons and tons of revenue. They were hemorrhaging money. Here is D&D Shorts talking about it.
We won. It's 2 minutes past 9 on January 27th, 2023. And 54 minutes ago, Wizards of the Coast released a tweet on the D&D Beyond account, which said, "Over the past few weeks, you, the community, have made your voices heard, and we've listened. OGL 1.0A will remain untouched, and the entire SRD 5.1 is now available under a Creative Commons license. You choose which you prefer to use." This is...
Beautiful.
Oh my god. You know what a big deal this is. Wizards of the Coast are a billion-dollar company. They tried to do something terrible, and we, as a community, stepped up to the plate, and we punched them out.
Okay, so when he's saying, you know what a big deal this is, that was for his audience, which plays, it's a D&D channel. So if you're not aware, what they essentially said was, takesies, backsies, mulligan. Essentially, they're not going through with the plan they had attempted to go through. We're going to say it again later because repetition is important, or rather consistency in repetition is important. But let me just be clear. When he said we did it, we got what we wanted, it's because they were crystal clear about what they wanted from the beginning. There wasn't one group calling for the preserving of the original open gaming license. There wasn't another group saying, we want slight modifications made. It was flat out, we are going to leave if this goes through. And then when the company had a document leak that said what they were going to try to do was release the thing later, essentially. But still the same, just later when people forgot about it. Then there was a mass exodus. And then they tried to release another version of the gaming license. And they said, what do you think about this? And the mass exodus continued because all the bad stuff was still in there. We're going to go into detail in a moment, but it's a moment of triumph. Let's let this guy celebrate. Also, it's about to be pretty informative.
We punched them out. We won. There is so much to celebrate here. This is a victory for the entire community. It would have been absolutely impossible without the entire community coming together as one voice and making their demands heard. Wizards did everything they could. They tried to hide it, then they ignored it, then they denied it, and then we won. What we also know is we put enough pressure on them financially to force them to back off. They've seen the crazy success that Paizo have had selling 8 months worth of books in 2 weeks, and they've freaked out and they've realized literally they cannot hold on to this. The fact that they're putting the whole SRD 5.1 means that most people won't even need an OGL anymore, and once it's in Creative Commons, they really can't walk that one back. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, I haven't had a chance to speak to the lawyers yet, but I think that once it's there, it's not even theirs anymore. So 5e content will forever be protected, and they can't.
So when he's saying 5e, he's referring to Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. All that stuff, set it aside. Don't get lost in the weeds. It comes down to this. When he was talking about Paizo, that was the person I was referring to earlier, the company I was referring to earlier, the other tabletop game maker. But set all those details aside. It breaks down to this. The community heard about a thing that they didn't like. In fact, that video is an absolute delight to listen to, if only because of the victory. But that's more or less the end of the general relevance right there. The link is in the description if you're interested. But I want to stick on this because, man, we can learn. So to recap what he said, D&D has thrown in the towel. Rather, Wizards of the Coast, the makers of Dungeons & Dragons, have thrown in the towel utterly. And the chain of events went like this. The community heard about it. Let's make some comparisons as we go. So imagine that community was all of America, for example. In this case, the D&D community heard about it. They objected. It was all over social media. It was all the D&D shorts, every channel that covers Dungeons & Dragons put in their 2 cents. A lot of them started their videos with, you guys have been talking about the OGL a ton. You've been telling me to make videos. Okay, so here it is. The OGL update, blah, blah, blah. That's your representative right there. So all those content creators that were following it, speaking out, yada, yada, think of that like your representative. Then what happened? A competitor came in and started sweeping up all of the business that D&D was doing. They took a firm stance against it. They used it to advertise. I happen to know a bit about Paizo. They are an extremely left-leaning company. I believe they were genuine, but in their reasons for doing what they did, I believe they would have done it if they wouldn't have made another dime. But it can't be denied what he just said. They sold 8 months worth of product in a couple of weeks. In the analogy then, that's the primaries. Going over it again, they heard about it like we just heard about Tyree Nichols. Their representatives, as YouTubers in that case, and as our literal representatives in this case, spoke about it. Then the competition started getting the money. Now that's represented by primary votes. We heard about Tyree Nichols. Theoretically, we're going to talk to our representatives. We're going to send them emails. We're going to shoot them phone calls. Got to watch my wording there. Good Lord. We're going to make phone calls. Then the results need to be reflected in the primaries. Anybody who doesn't get on board with federal police reform, primary them. Make that a big deal. Wherever you are, make it a big deal. How does it end? Wizards of the Coast throws in the towel. They could not sustain the losses. They knew it. They knew there was even worse than any one scandal. There was a cultural change happening. They were losing their crown as the kings of tabletop. If you think of tabletop games, you probably first think of Dungeons & Dragons. In 10 years, that may not be so, because I'll tell you, Paizo, which makes the game Pathfinder, is the new favorite of that community. Similarly, in this analogy to America, the Democrats are Wizards of the Coast. The old guard of all, Democrats, Republicans, whatever, they're Wizards of the Coast. They need to throw in the towel because they got to get hurt so bad in the primaries that they simply cannot afford not to respond to these demands. Use this as a playbook. I'm sure I'll do another video where I'm more concise, but that's important to see. That is a direct cause and effect, by the way, with very quick action that happened right before our eyes. And now is the time. Now is the time to start doing these actions. In this analogy, we need your representative talking about federal legislation to start a database of police misconduct. We need them to do that now. Why? Because 2024 is coming up. They are forming what their campaigns are going to be about. And whether they agree to talk about it or refuse to talk about it, they're going to have to commit. And that will tell you how you should vote in the primaries. You don't have to worry about the country going to hell because some crazy Trumpist got elected in the primaries. That's what the primaries are for. Get your political views as narrowly as represented as possible with your vote. Don't compromise in the primaries. If you got to compromise, yeah, you do that later in the general vote. That's the vote blue no matter who. I'm very much a believer in that. But the primaries, no. No, that's where you get a chance to show the Democratic Party which way they ought to go. If we get a very blue couple of primary wins in 24, expect all Democrats thereafter to shift left. That's the goal here. I sound angry, but I'm tickled. I'm delighted by the results of the open gaming license controversy. What about 3.5? I'm not sure what you're asking. It's my preferred version of Dungeons and Dragons. I'll tell you that. By a country mile. I'm not sure how it's represented. I think that is still under the old open gaming license, but I couldn't say with a certainty. I will say from here on out, I am a Pathfinder player. I announced it on air, so now I gotta. But just on general principle, I like the company Paizo, and in terms of tabletop games, it's just I like to not learn a bunch of new systems all the time. So I stick to something long term. And hey, talking about good long term investments, progressives are the way to go. Well, thank you for joining me tonight. I have had a wonderful time talking with you about the goings-on of the day. I will, of course, be back tomorrow and every day for the foreseeable future. This is WYCD Wicked. That stands for What You Can Do. See you next time.